Please be seated. So, I'm going to begin my official pastoral and homiletical relationship with Calvary Church with an apology. Here's why. Since this is the first service I've ever attended, 10 o'clock service at least, much less preached at Calvary, I thought it might be helpful to watch a few sermons on the website in preparation. And it wasn't. Trust me, if you're about to start a new job and your colleagues are all smart and insightful and just generally really good at what they do, don't go looking for video footage of them being very good at what they do. It doesn't boost your confidence going in. But honestly, it was Buddy whose preaching I found the most annoying. Seriously, he had the gall to be really, really good to the end. I mean, Paul and Eileen and Neil are still here, so it makes sense for them to give it their all week after week. But Buddy, he was on the way out. Seems like the Christian thing to do would have been to kind of phone in those last few sermons. You wouldn't have been so sad to see him go, and the new guy has less to live up to. I don't see the downside. Sorry, back to the apology, though. It was in watching those sermons that I noticed that most of the preachers here do something that's really very common. They begin with that simple prayer in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Well, maybe Neil doesn't do that, but he's a curate, and curates get away with stuff the rest of us don't. Anyway, that's not been my practice either, which means that at least for some of you here, the very first words I spoke in the Calvary pulpit were wrong. And now I'm apologizing for that, which might also be the wrong thing to do, but there it is. But my hope is that even for those of you who were put off by this sermon's opening, that you'll have a little sympathy for the pressure on a brand new rector, one with a billboard-sized image of his smiling self just outside that door. Thank you, Robin. To deliver a real zinger for his first sermon, right? It's a real thing. Just the other night at dinner, I'd barely met Andy Cates when he said, "You know you have to preach the best sermon of your life on Sunday, don't you?" Thanks, Andy. Really helpful to have it framed that way. This is clearly someone I'll look for insightful counsel and encouragement in the days to come. But the problem is that there is just too much of me that actually believes what Andy was joking about. And so where, you might ask, did I find myself in the gospel lesson for today, first of all? Well, I feared I'd be with the children sitting in the marketplace calling out, "We played the flute for you, and you didn't dance. We wailed, and you did not mourn." Other ancient manuscripts add, I told a joke at the beginning of my sermon, and you didn't laugh. What if I got my very first sermon at Calvary perfectly wrong? What if it, or really, what if I just didn't measure up? Well, you don't have to be a preacher to know the burden of needing to perform, do you? The burden of needing to get something just right so people will respond to you in kind. The burden of getting the world to dance at your songs and to weep at your sad stories. Anybody else here ever been weighed down by this need to perform? If not as a preacher, then as a student, or as a daughter, as a lover, as a dad. Well, Jesus says there's another way. But first, I think he actually says he knows how we feel. Since we Christians tend to think Jesus could do anything and get any response he wanted from the world, it's strange to read that he didn't seem to feel this way at all at times. We see Jesus as this charismatic healer, this first-century religious rock star who could hardly fend off all the fans and groupies hanging on his every word. But go read the stories again. How many times does he say, "You just don't get it, do you? In fact, you just don't get me"? He said that to his disciples and to his friends. He said it to the crowds of followers and to the religious authorities. He even seemed to say it to Pontius Pilate in those awkward silences and the cryptic responses at his trial. We see Jesus as perfectly sure of himself and unwaveringly in control. But isn't it possible that there was at least a little loneliness and maybe even a feeling of inadequacy in being so relentlessly misunderstood. Most people didn't dance when Jesus played the flute, not even those closest in. In today's gospel, he says it pretty plainly. He says he and John the Baptist were out of sync with this world. They were two guys who couldn't seem to satisfy the people they met. John came with his ascetic ways, and they said he had a demon. Jesus came eating and drinking, and they called him a glutton and a drunkard who partied with all the wrong people. Could it be that even these two great prophets, who we think had the world by the tail, didn't feel that at all sometimes? It's kind of strange to consider, but I have to say, it's also a little comforting to imagine that they didn't. Especially on days when I'm not quite sure I'm even up to being someone as ordinary and unimpressive as me. And when most of us feel inadequate or ineffective, when we feel like we're failing those oppressive performance reviews that this world is always imposing upon us, it's almost instinctive to just alter the performance, ramp it up a bit. We play a different tune on our flutes. Maybe people will like this one. We wail a little louder. Maybe they'll weep along with us now. But as we do this, we lose touch with something essential in ourselves, don't we? As we pander for the praise and the attention of other people, at some point we realize that the person they're praising is a stranger to the self we are deeper down. So Jesus doesn't play along, and he tells us not to either. Even in a moment of feeling disconnected and misunderstood, he turns aside and he prays. He says to God, I'm grateful that your ways are hidden. I'm grateful that the judgments of this world are not your judgments. I'm grateful that your ways are misunderstood by the wise and by the intelligent, because maybe that means there's more to me than what the wise and the intelligent can see. And maybe Jesus then says that God's ways have been revealed to infants, because children don't seem to need the praise of the wise and the intelligent like we grown-ups do they? A child will go about her play oblivious to whether you've got an advanced degree or have been made a partner at your firm, or even have been called rector of a storied old parish where most priests would give their eye teeth to serve. All the child cares about is whether you're willing to go all in and join her in the game or the song that's being played right here and right now. But as we grow up, we learn quickly to care more and more about what the wise and the intelligent think of us, don't we? We learn to resist the urge to dance when the flutes are played. We learn it's unbecoming to weep. We measure our responses to the world, and when we do, a distance opens up between us and that world. It's a strange phenomenon, but we all know it's true. Needing the world's affirmation ends up making us feel only further away from the people whose approval we need. And that way of being in the world, says Jesus, is a great, great burden. It's a great burden he wants to relieve us of. Come to me, he says, all of you that are weary and carrying the heavy burden of being misunderstood, the burden of loneliness that comes from performing your life for a world that will never quite get you, or the burden of never quite getting that life what the world calls right. Jesus says, come to me. My yoke is so much easier than all that. My burden is so much lighter, because in me, the performance reviews are all called off. Now go live like you trust me, he says. Go live like you believe that you are already loved. Go live like you always will be, no matter how well or how horribly you perform in this world. Well, I really did want to preach the best sermon ever this morning, and now we all know that didn't happen. Maybe I should be sorry about this too, but I'm not. Not really. You see, I'm only here at Calvary at all because the people you charged with finding your next rector did not demand performances or perfection. They struck me from the start as people who understood the ways of grace. Their posture of listening, their open-heartedness, that opened up something unexpected in me. Last Christmas, Ardell and I would have returned blank stares to anybody who said we'd be living in Memphis by the 4th of July. But now here we are, in a new old house, mostly unpacked, a few pictures actually on the wall. We're here, and you've already dropped off loaves of bread and bottles of wine and jars of honey. You've told us where we can buy groceries, watch movies, ride bicycles, even get veterinary help for the 2 dogs whose digestive systems had a less than gracious response to the move here. We are here, we are full of anticipation and gratefulness for the life we're beginning with each of you, a life we never could have imagined on our own. And what I really mean by all this is that we are all of us changed by other people trying to be true to the ways of grace, aren't we? And that means that other people's lives can be changed by God through ours as well. When the burden of trusting in the world's fickle judgments slips off our shoulders, we find rest for our souls. But as we do, we will look at the other burdens people of this world, the lonely, the insecure, the hungry, the frightened, all of us poor souls struggling to win the praise of the wise and the intelligent. We will look at other people differently. We'll see them not as failures, but as gifted children of God, full of possibility and promise, not just pain and lack. We'll see them as people worthy of our compassion, our attention, our friendship. Distances between us close down. New possibilities can open up. Such is the contagion of grace. We catch it from other people. Other people can catch it from us if we'll let them in. People have been catching it from Calvary for generations. And so what I look for and what I pray for here is an absolute epidemic of grace in downtown Memphis in the years to come, spreading into the lives of people who today might not imagine there's any grace at all in this world that's meant for them, spreading also ever more deeply into your life and into mine.